Coming up next on Arizona Horizon, the federal government proposes options to break the impasse on a Colorado River water sharing agreement. Also tonight, we'll meet the new chair of the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors and a life-saving push for minority communities to become organ donors. Those stories and more next on Arizona Horizon.
Arizona Horizon is made possible by contributions from the Friends of Arizona PBS, members of your public television station.
Good evening and welcome to Arizona Horizon. I'm Ted Simons. The federal government recently proposed a list of options to break the impasse on the future of Colorado River management. This is a deadline approaches for Arizona and the 6 other Colorado River using states to reach a water sharing agreement. Joining us now, Sarah Porter, director of ASU's Kyle Center for Water Policy. Sarah, good to have you here. Thanks for joining us. This list of options, is this a here's 5 things we could do, pick one? What's going on here?
Well, so what we're talking about is the rules for operating the Colorado River system, a series of reservoirs upstream of Lake Powell, and then Lake Powell and Lake Mead, and water delivered out of that. And any change in how that system is operated requires review under NEPA, under the Environmental Protection Act. And so first and foremost, what the feds released was a very thorough analysis of how a series of different options would work, and in order to make sure they're complying with environmental regulations. They modeled out 5 different proposals, or one was no action, but 4 different proposals for managing this massive system. And their idea was these different proposals, as modeled, would have the components of a future agreement among the 7 Colorado River sharing states. And as we've discussed before, the states are really at an impasse in terms of agreeing on how to operate this big system and who should take what cuts. The hope of the Bureau of Reclamation is that components of the different proposals could be put together to come up, to form an agreement that would have kept the NEPA process going.
So it's not pick one of these and be done with it. It's mix and match, take what you like, share what you like, leave the rest, that kind of a thing?
To some extent, that is what it's about. And then to some extent, it's about getting this sort of like to kind of turn the heat up a little bit under the negotiators to say, look, this is how these different options would work out. So maybe you should, compromise on this and negotiate harder on that, and let's get it done.
Talking about turning the heat up on negotiators, apparently a recent meeting of the 7 states in Salt Lake City, trying to find agreement. It sounds like not much, if anything, was accomplished. Deb, we've talked about this for so long. It doesn't seem like progress is being made.
I say never. We could wake up and read that they have come to an agreement, but they've been at this for years. And all of the ideas that they can possibly come up with, have been out there and discussed to death. There just is an impasse between the upper basin and the lower basin at this point.
Talk about that impasse. What exactly are the sticking points?
The biggest sticking point is related to the upper basin's refusal to share in cuts. Their insistence that all of the cuts should fall on the lower basin. The lower basin is Arizona, California, and Nevada. The upper basin is Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, and Wyoming. And they're saying because we use far below our 7.5 million acre feet apportionment every year. And so since our use is so low, we shouldn't have to take cuts. And they're sort of saying that falls to you, lower basin states. The lower basin is pointing out that the lower basin has reduced its water use significantly, and that they've actually offered to take a significant first portion of the cuts, and said the upper basin should be sharing in additional cuts on top of that first large portion of cuts. But it's not that is not being accepted by the upper basin.
I was going to say, it sounds like my way or the highway from the upper basin states. Are they just simply not willing to negotiate?
I think they're willing to negotiate, but not about that.
Yeah.
There are other areas of disagreement that probably we could get to agreement on those, but there are more technical issues about how the reservoirs are managed, especially Lake Powell and Lake Mead, that there are disagreements over. But it really is a big impasse about the perception, the difference in perception between the upper basin and the lower basin related to the upper basin's obligation to deliver water to the lower basin. And the upper basin says we don't have that obligation, and therefore we don't have to share in cuts because our obligation to deliver water is not, we don't feel threatened by the potential for you to demand that we send water to you.
Real quickly, the 5 options. Again, these aren't in and of themselves solutions, but there could be aspects of them. One of them is supply-driven, and it sounds like that's a new idea based on what, 2-3 years of natural flows. How would that work?
Yeah, so this is a way of managing the reservoirs that hasn't been tried yet, and it is really creative. And I'll say that Director Bushatsky of the Arizona Department of Water Resources put forth this option in June and said, why don't we try this? And so what we've done in the past is mostly looked at reservoir levels. And the supply-driven option would look at what are the average flows in the river, natural flows, over some period of time, and then it would base water availability or cuts on flows, like real flows instead of how much water is sitting in the reservoirs.
Sounds like an adjustable rate, though. Is that the kind of thing that goes over very well?
It would need to be carefully thought through and modeled out. The issue is, again, the upper basin has said, we love this supply-driven option, but not if it involves our using less water.
Yeah. So we talked about Salt Lake City, the recent meeting, not much accomplished there. I think there's another meeting coming up here shortly, true?
There has been some talk about the Secretary of Interior actually requesting that the governors of the 7 states join their principals in a meeting. In fact, at the big Colorado River Water Users Association conference in late December, Director Bushatsky mentioned that there had been an unsuccessful attempt. He said it was because of people's time schedules, but they couldn't get the governors together with the negotiators. But he asked the Bureau of Reclamation, to try again. I think we're at a point, the negotiators have just tried everything they can come up with, and so possibly getting the governors together could alter states' unwillingness or willingness to enter certain compromises. That's the hope.
And as far as the agreement is concerned, the timetable for this and why there is a deadline, and what happens if you just shoot on past the deadline? Can you shoot? Or is that when the courts get involved and that's when the Interior Department gets involved?
So all of that.
Yes.
There is now a Arizona Statehood Day deadline. Other people call it February 14th for the states to come to an agreement. If they don't, we're not sure what would happen. But what we really need, it's by October of 2026 when the Bureau of Reclamation has to know what it's going to do for the next year. And there's so much that has to be done if there's an agreement in the lead up to October 2026, including Arizona's legislature has to approve a change. In many instances, we need congressional authorization for changes. So there's a lot that has to happen. If there is no agreement, the federal government, the Bureau of Reclamation, really has a choice of just falling back on the old operating guidelines, which are in place. They're from the 70s, and just deliver water according to priority until the reservoirs crash, or taking unilateral action outside of consensus of the states. And I think in the case of action outside of consensus, there's a high likelihood of legal challenges. Mm-hmm. And if the amount of water that the lower basin believes the upper basin is obligated to deliver isn't delivered, then there is a high likelihood of legal action by the lower basin states to require, somehow compel the Upper Basin to deliver that water.
Holy smokes. Sarah Porter, Kyle Center for Water Policy. I mean, we keep waiting for good things to happen here. Maybe they will happen here shortly.
They might, or there may be a move to the legal forum, and there can still be an agreement. We've seen states settle these kinds of disputes even when they've gotten into litigation. So we're not without hope.
All right, Sarah, we'll leave it at that. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
It's known as America's finest city, San Diego. And people aren't the only ones who enjoy it here. Because San Diego isn't just America's finest city, it's also America's wildest.
Wednesday night at 7 on Arizona PBS.
Asteroids, agents of destruction. But in early Earth, did they make life possible?
Asteroids could have delivered the building blocks of life.
A radical theory of life's beginning. Were asteroids the spark of life on Nova?
Wednesday night at 8 on Arizona PBS.
On Secrets of the Dead.
At war's end, Bruno Loza is a former Nazi, an art plunderer, but he was acquitted, and so he goes to America. The museum world explodes. They need works to exhibit.
There was too much money to be made, and there were no consequences.
Wednesday night at 9 on Arizona PBS.
The Maricopa County Board of Supervisors has a new leader with a familiar name. She is Kate Brophy-McGee, and she's a third-generation Arizonan who previously served in both the Arizona House and Senate. And we welcome new Board of Supervisors Chair Kate Brophy-McGee to Arizona Horizon. Good to see you again.
Oh, it's wonderful to see you.
Yes. Okay. Thoughts on taking over the chair? You're the chair of the Board of Supervisors. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's another step to keeping cohesion and stability for the county. It is something I'm very, very honored to do, and I'm really looking forward to the next year. It's a big year.
Yeah, it is a big year. What are the duties and responsibilities of the chair?
Well, the chair is the spokesperson on behalf of the board. The chair sets the agenda, works with the county manager, works on various issues coming to the board, and works with elected officials as well, who are not a part of the board, but county has elected officials. And as I said, I am so honored to do that.
You also mentioned it's going to be a big year, and it sure is because of elections, and it's such a big story. Is the county ready for elections, primary and general?
Absolutely. What I can tell you is that state statute splits responsibilities between the recorder and the Board of Supervisors. And it is a somewhat complicated split, but basically the recorder handles voter registration, early ballots, and then the board is in charge of tabulating, also preparing the ballots and sending them out. So it's a bifurcated process, and to the extent that we can make peace with the recorder who sued us early on, then I think we can look forward to excellent outcomes. I will also point out that I have been in or part of 17 different elections. So I've watched this process closely for years.
Was there not a comprehensive review conducted, I believe, last year? Was that?
I'm glad you asked. We conducted an audit, or we are in the process of wrapping up an audit, both of the elections equipment and the chain of custody and elections procedures. And we're expecting to put that on a public agenda soon and really review deeply any changes or recommendations they make, and of course implement them.
Critics say that residents aren't confident in how elections are run in Maricopa County. One of the folks that's critical of how, that confidence is the county recorder, and there has been friction there. Where does that relationship stand right now, and what can be done to mend fences?
In my speech as the incoming chair, I extended an olive branch to Recorder Heap. The message I have gotten during this entire past year from my constituents and from other constituents is fix the problem, we want a good election. So it's really not about differences between personalities or offices, it's about working together for a good outcome on behalf of the constituents that elected us to office. I fully expect we will be able to work out, as we have with a special election this past year and also mail-in ballot comprehensive elections, we will come to some conclusion.
You mentioned special election. There's a public safety tax that is of your, I think you mentioned it, one of, if not your top priority, correct?
Yes, it is my top priority. So it is a renewal of a 1/5 of a cent sales tax after 20 years. We had a comprehensive review of the continuation, the potential for continuing that tax by a wonderful public safety committee who concluded that we should ask for that extension. It funds basic maintenance and operations of the Sheriff's Department and other functions, both of like adult probation, juvenile corrections, and up to 99.4% essential operations on behalf of public safety.
How do you get that message out that this is an important thing and don't let it get lost?
We keep talking about it. We voted to extend, or asked the voters to extend, the tax. My very first board meeting as chair. And we are out and about in the community, cities and towns who access our jail services, who access our public safety issues related, for instance, to the work of the county attorney, are very interested and will work with us and partner with us to get this extension passed.
You mentioned your constituents, and you mentioned something that I found fascinating. You were saying your judgment versus public opinion, and that it would be a betrayal to sacrifice your judgment to opinion. I've asked this in debates for people who want to go to Washington. Will you go to Washington to do what you think is right, or will you go to Washington to do what your constituents think is right, even though you think it's wrong? It's a bit of a conundrum for a politician, isn't it?
Not really.
Ah.
Governor Hull, when she helped me get appointed to the Washington Elementary School Board, gave me those words. And I wasn't quite sure what to make of them, but after 25, 26 years in office, I now understand that constituents elect me to go into that office, do my homework, do my deep dives, and make my best decision as to what is right. It's not the popular soundbite, it's not what the loudest person in the room wants. It has to be right and it has to fit in. And over the course of 10 years in the legislature, I gained a lot of experience. You see the same issues over and over again, just different clothes. And so you know where to land on it. And you know what questions to ask. And I feel that is the same being a county supervisor.
Yeah, and now the chair of the County Board of Supervisors.
Exactly.
Congratulations on that. And good luck this year. We'll have you back on if you will come on. We certainly would appreciate it. And good to see you again.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Dignity Health St. Joseph's Norton Thoracic Institute is pushing for Hispanics and other minority communities to become organ donors. It's an effort to bridge the gap between donations and need in minority populations. And here to tell us more is Gabriel Quiros. He's the kidney transplant coordinator at Dignity Health. Welcome to Arizona Horizon. Good to have you here.
Thank you, Ted.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. I am a kidney transplant coordinator. I'm in the business of transplant, and life-saving transplant can help hundreds of thousands of people.
Yeah, I want to get to that in a second, but diversifying the organ pool here is what we're talking about.
Yep.
How big an issue is that?
So we have found that of the over 100,000 people on the transplant list in the United States, there is a very large percentage of that is minority. And with that said, transplant can be done, blood type matching, between anybody, and it can be a successful transplant. However, science has shown that genetic matching, or at least a genetic match, can even increase that longevity of a transplanted organ.
Has it always been this way with the numbers as they are now?
It's continuing to grow every single day.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's the impact of better diversity, I would imagine.
Yep, exactly. And we live in an area where it's a highly population of diabetes, high blood pressure, which can lead to that kidney failure. And we see it more and more every day.
Yeah, I was going to ask about specifically diabetes, but also high blood pressure and heart disease, and the fact that 60% of people on the transplant list apparently come from minority communities. Is it the difficulty of getting people to donate, or is it difficult to get people to donate that match up?
I think it's a little bit of both, but I think more so just getting the people out there and the education out there that they can help their loved ones.
The impact of things like genetics on kidney disease, we'll start with that one,
right,
with kidney transplants. How does that factor into all this?
So that is a very great question, because you think about it, higher percentage minority need transplants. So can that higher percentage of minority still donate?
Yes.
Right. So, people can go to the motor vehicle division and put that they want to be a donor on their driver's license, and that's becoming a donor at the time of passing, whenever their time comes. A deceased donor can save up to 8 lives, whether that just be through eye and tissue donation or major organ donation.
I was going to ask about eye and tissue donation, because it sounds like that's needed, especially in the Hispanic community as well. Talk to us about that.
Well, I don't specialize in that area, but eye and tissue donation can absolutely help in certain, disease processes that affect those organs as well.
Yeah, African American community as well, more likely to need, less likely to donate. True?
That is true, but I think a big part of that is getting that education out there, being able to help your loved ones, being able to offer that gift of potential life. Part of being a donor is also being healthy yourself, at least from a living donor standpoint, where a live person wants to give their kidney to their loved one. And that's something that we do at the Norton Thoracic Institute at St. Joseph's Hospital, is work up living donors to make sure that they are healthy enough to be able to donate that organ, and statistically that they don't have a higher risk of kidney failure later in life.
And that is a concern, getting that health up
Absolutely.
there? You're finding that?
Absolutely.
What about like general distrust of the medical system? Is that playing a part in all this?
I think that's playing a part in our world today in general, but I think the most important part of that is just providing the education and being able to be there to answer those questions for people, to help them make those decisions.
And what about money? I mean, donations can be expensive all the way around here. How does that factor in?
So, we definitely educate that there's no there's no financial gain for donating, but insurances are involved, and most recipient insurances do cover the donation process for the living donor.
I was going to say, but the living donor would have to miss work, I would think. There is a recovery time, is there not?
Yep. And so, we look at what their options might be if they have employment through their FMLA programs. There are other organizations out there that do allow to help financing for travel and lodging for living donations. So there are those resources that we can talk through with those living donor candidates.
Are there cultural issues to get passed, religious issues to get passed?
Most religions do not have any issue with donation of organs. However, I would always, advise somebody to reach out to their local religious leaders. Culturally, I also don't believe there's much that I have run into. I come from a very large Hispanic family, and you find a little bit ways on both sides. One, I would do anything to help any member of my family, but two, I would also have a really hard time asking any of my loved ones to help me.
Right.
And I would almost prefer to wait on a list than have somebody help me. But that's again where the education from the medical professionals comes in play, and we can provide that information for them.
Sounds like a family to me.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Gabriel Quiros, again, Dignity Health St. Joseph's Norton Thoracic. That's a lot of words in there. You got a lot going on there. But thanks for this information. We hope it gets out there and hope things improve. And thanks again for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having.
And that is it for now. I'm Ted Simons. Thank you so much for joining us. You have a great evening.
When you want to be more inspired, Arizona PBS delivers unforgettable experiences in music, theater, and the arts, thanks to members like you. And
you play flutes and